I have a bit of a confession to make. Sometimes, I just can't stand people. I want to, but I just can't. Sometimes they make it so hard for me to love them. Sometimes I struggle to feel bad for people. When I was younger, I would watch America's Funniest Home Videos. Now, even when I'm scrolling on Instagram Reels or TikTok, and if I see someone wiping out, I laugh. That's kind of funny. Even when Art was telling a story, that's kind of funny. It's hard for me to have compassion sometimes, in those, not just fail videos or whatever, but also in more serious situations. When my daughter, sometimes I tell her, I'm like, hey, don't jump on the couch. And then she'll go over to the couch, get on it, start jumping on it, and then she falls off and starts crying. And in that moment, I don't really feel that bad. She's kind of getting what she deserves. I try to tell her. I run out of compassion for people. In fact, that's what I always used to think compassion was. It was feeling bad for people, even though they get what they deserve. And I realized, I really didn't understand compassion. But I think that's a problem that we can all deal with. We don't really understand what compassion is. In fact, I'm willing to bet that if I called on 3 random people here in this room and asked for a definition of compassion, we would get 3 very different answers. Maybe for you, you think that compassion is a little soft. Maybe it's even a little feminine. Some people have it, other people don't. Maybe you think that compassion means that people are getting off the hook. They don't get the justice that they need. It means forgiving everybody no matter what. Maybe for you, you think compassion is something that you can run out of. It's like sugar or milk, right? If you're running low, then you can't spare any for anybody else. If you've got something going on in your life, you're I don't have any compassion to share with anyone else. We don't really understand compassion, and it's especially challenging because we don't even really know what it means. And I think for Christians, it's even worse because we can either wildly misunderstand what compassion is or ignore it completely. Let's be honest with ourselves. In the Christian world, things like love, mercy, forgiveness, those are the headliners, right? They're the ones that get all the attention. That's what we pray for. We pray to grow in love and mercy and forgiveness. We don't really talk about compassion that much. But do you know that when God describes himself, the first word that he chooses isn't love, it's not mercy, it's not forgiveness, it's actually compassion. So if that's the first word that God picks to describe himself, then we had better really consider what actually that means. But the good news and the truth that we're going to see today is that God himself is compassion. Today we're going to be zooming out and looking at a bunch of different scriptures in the Old Testament and the New Testament to get a comprehensive picture of what compassion really is. What does God show us about compassion, and what does he say about it? The fancy word for what we're doing is we're going to do a brief systematic theology of compassion. So hang with me, but I think it's going to be worth it. Now, nowhere is God's compassion more directly evident than in Exodus chapter 34. A little bit of context for Exodus 34, because the context is really important. So Moses has just gone up the mountain on Mount Sinai. He's gotten the 10 commandments from God. He's come back down the mountain, and then he sees God's people already. He's gone for just a little bit, and they are already worshiping another God. They're worshiping a golden cow statue. Right away. Moses realized that this is a big deal. He starts begging God to not destroy the Israelites, the people that he had just rescued from slavery to Egypt, parted the Red Sea, they walked through with the plagues. He had done all this stuff for them, and just in a moment, they had already broken their promise to him. So Moses is begging for forgiveness. God listens, bring Moses back on the mountain to give him the 10 commandments the second time, and while he's on the mountain, God says this to Moses. He passed in front of Moses, and God proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness. The first word that God chooses to describe himself is compassionate. These words would have hit different for Moses and for the Israelites. You got to imagine, they had just broken their promise. They're expecting that God's going to destroy them. It's like finding out that your spouse cheating on you on your wedding night. Like, they had just betrayed the covenant that they made with God, and the first thing that comes to his mind to describe himself is compassionate. Now, compassionate doesn't just mean forgiveness. And we know that because David also talks about God's compassion in Psalms. In Psalm 103, David says, "As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him." Now, this word fear here, it doesn't mean like a jump scare. What he's saying is that God has compassion on the people who worship him, on the people who respect him, who honor him, who give him glory. He's comparing the love that God has for his people to that of a father to his child. This is such an important part of compassion. It's not just forgiveness, it's also relational. It's the relationship between a father and a son. It's almost impossible to have compassion on someone that you do not know, that you do not have relationship with. It's not a cold, calculating, legal sense of forgiveness. It's the compassion that a father would have on their son. It's a deep welling up of emotion. And in fact, the Greek word for compassion literally means the feeling that you get in your bowels that bubbles up. It's like a love that is so strong, sometimes you can feel it. It's a bubbling up of love that a father would have for his child. Jesus actually tells a story that gives us a picture of what that love is like. In Luke, there's a son who leaves his father. He burns the bridge on the way out. He cusses him out. He says that he wishes his dad was dead, and he leaves, and they never expect to see each other again. But after a while, the son realizes that the streets are a little bit harder than he thought, and he kind of wants to go back to be with his dad again. But the son thinks that the way that he left his relationship with his father was so bad that he can't even be his son anymore. Like, there's no hope. It was so awkward when he left. It was so tense that his best case scenario is that when he comes back to be with his dad will make him a slave in his house. So the son decides to go back. Jesus tells this story. The son got up and went to his father. But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. As soon as the father looks off into the distance and he's like, I think that might be my son, come back, he is filled from the innermost part of his being, from the pit of his stomach, a bubbling up emotion of love and compassion for his son that results in him running and giving him a hug and a kiss. The son thought that there was absolutely no hope that his dad would even look at him with love again. But compassion welling up inside is this deep, deep overflow of love for someone. Yes, a father is going to forgive his child, but it's so much more than that. It is a love that is overflowing and spills onto the people around us. Ladies, God also includes you. Through the prophet Isaiah, he says this about compassion. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child that she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. Isaiah asks a rhetorical question, which means this is a question that he didn't expect an answer. It's an obvious answer. He's asking, can a mother ever forget about her child? Yes or no? No, of course not. A mother would never forget about her child. It's impossible. That's her baby. But God says that even if a mom forgets about her child, I will not forget about you. He compares his love to that of a mother, and he says, I don't even just measure up. I'm exceeding that love. Now, it's very possible that you're sitting here and you're struggling a little bit right now. Because maybe a part of your story is that your mom or your dad did not have compassion on you. And so you're struggling to relate to this. There's two things that I want to share with you The first is this: if your mom and your dad did not have compassion on you, that is not okay. It's not okay. That is not God's plan for parents. God's plan for parents is that a mom and a dad would have compassion on their children. The second thing I want you to know is this: please don't miss the point of what God is trying to do here. He's comparing his compassion to the deepest, strongest, most intimate relationship that you can ever experience here on earth. That between a parent and a child. And he says, not only do I measure up to this, I exceed it. My compassion for you is a deep, deep well, and it will never, ever run dry. So even if your parents fell horribly short, God says that my compassion never, ever will. It's this deep overflowing of love. Now, in some ways, the entire Old Testament can be summed up as God showing his compassion. If you're going to put a summary on the entire Old Testament and everything that happened, you could do a lot worse than saying the Old Testament is all about God showing his compassion. Because there's a very similar pattern that goes throughout the entire thing. God loves us, we blow it, he has compassion on us, and then he rescues us. In fact, the entire Old Testament is an exercise of us blowing it and God having compassion on us. Adam and Eve blew it, and God had compassion on them. Moses blew it, and God had compassion on them. Abraham blew it, yet God still had compassion on him. David blew it, yet God still had compassion on him. The Israelites blew it, and God still had compassion on them over and over and over and over again until we get to the end of the Old Testament, and we're like, when's it gonna stop? Something's gotta give. Either God is going to run out of compassion or we got to stop blowing it. Like, is this our life? Is this what's going to go on forever and ever? And we know that God says he's never going to run out of compassion. And yet it looks like we can never stop blowing it. Because I'll tell you, if Abraham, Moses, David, if they couldn't do it, I'll tell you right now, nobody in this room can do it. So what's the hope? Do you know that Jesus is God's compassion made into a man? That Jesus is the personification. He is a man made of God's compassion. Scripture says that the fullness of everything that God is, we see in Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate expression of God's compassion for his people because Jesus was the only one that could interrupt that horrible cycle of blowing it and compassion, of sin and forgiveness, of mercy and restoration. Jesus came in and interrupted the cycle because when he died on the cross, he paid the price for all of the sin and all of the world and all of people for all time. And now anyone who believes in him has the hope of compassion from God. He interrupted the cycle. He proved his love. How could he not? A father, of course he's going to die for his children. I think I can speak for all of the dads in the room that we would gladly die for our children. We would gladly take a bullet for them. How much more would God do that? It's this act of compassion that he shows us. Now we get to see Jesus' compassion on full display in many places in the New Testament. The first one I want to look at is actually in Matthew. So Jesus has been going from town to town. He's been healing people. And imagine this. Because Jesus has been healing people of their sicknesses, of their illnesses. He's been bringing people back to life. Of course, he's going to have crowds of people wanting to get his attention. But even Jesus gets a little tired and overwhelmed. He gets in the boat, and he's like, I got to find a private place to pray. He says, I got to get away for a little bit. I got to center myself. But the crowds follow him. And this is Jesus' reaction when he lands on the shore. When Jesus landed on the shore, he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Even though Jesus was exhausted and needed a moment to himself, he sees the crowd of people and he feels that deep well of emotion bubbling up inside of him that results in him doing something to help the people. He's moved with compassion, so he heals their sick. In Mark, we see a specific example of a sick man who comes to Jesus. A leper comes to Jesus, imploring him, which means the leper is begging him on his knees. And he says to Jesus, Jesus, if you will, you can make me clean. Now, a leper was someone who was at the very bottom of society. The leper was the lowest of the low, was someone who had a horrible disease where their skin was covered in boils. Their skin would literally be falling off. A leper's existence is 24/7 pain. They survived by eating trash. They did not have a home. They did not have a family. Their family had ostracized them and kicked them out. If you saw a leper coming towards you, you would cross the street to get away from him. A leper didn't get invited to any birthday parties, no weddings. In fact, a leper couldn't even look forward to death because the Jewish people back then taught that they were so dirty, they were so sinful, there was nothing that they could ever do to be clean enough to be in God's presence. If they came begging to the temple for help, they would kick them away and send them away. You got to put yourself in the situation. This leper comes crawling to Jesus, begging him on his knees. The disciples would have stepped back, put their arm across Jesus, and said, back up, buddy. Because for a leper to touch a rabbi was unthinkable. They couldn't do it. They were so ostracized. They were so the lowest people on society that if you touched them, you became unclean. A leper wouldn't be able to remember the last time that he had physical touch, the last time that someone hugged him, the last time that someone put their hand on his shoulder or even shook his hand. The leper comes begging Jesus, and you can see this. Please don't miss this. This is so important. You can see how low he thought about himself because he couldn't even ask Jesus to heal him. He doesn't. He says, Jesus, if you will. He's saying, Jesus, I know you can heal me. I know you can heal me. He can't even ask him to heal him. He didn't even feel like he had the right to ask the rabbi to be healed. How does our God respond? Jesus is moved with compassion. He stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, I do want that. Be clean. When everyone would have been moved with disgust, our God was moved with compassion. He stretched out and touched him. Notice the order, it's so important. Jesus could have healed him first. He doesn't heal him first. He touches him first when he's still covered in the leprosy. Jesus didn't have to touch him at all, but he could have healed him first and then touched him. But he says, I'm going to reach out and put my hand on you and touch you first. The disciples would have gasped in horror when they saw Jesus' hand reaching out to touch this leper. This is a beautiful act of compassion. I wasn't planning on telling this story, but I think it's really important. When I was working as a nurse, we had this 14-year-old girl come into the hospital one day, and she had this disorder, this disease called scleroderma. Scleroderma is where your skin goes from being soft to being hard. We don't know what causes it. It starts in your hands and in your feet, and eventually it covers up your whole body, and it comes from the outside in. Eventually it cases your lungs so that your lungs can no longer expand and you die. You don't know why it happens, and there really is no treatment for it. And this 14-year-old girl was in the later stages of her disease. She could no longer move her body. And she was in the hospital because your skin becomes very fragile. And chunks of your skin falls off. And she had open wounds all over her body. And they had gotten infected. And so she was on our floor so that we could help her clean out her wounds. And we gave her all of the pain medication that we had, but it wasn't enough. And so we're cleaning her wounds, and the entire time she's crying and she's screaming. But the thing that made that the hardest for me was the entire time she's saying, I'm sorry. She's saying, I'm sorry that I'm crying. Thank you for helping me. And then when everybody else had left the room, and I just have this 14-year-old girl, she weighed like 79 pounds. I asked her, I said, how can I help you? And she said to me, will you just sit with me and hold my hand? It's been a long time since anyone held my hand. And so I did. I sat with her and I held her hand, and I started crying. And she said, don't cry for me. I said, how can you say that? And she said, I'm ready to die. Because I know that Jesus has a place for me. This girl's parents had abandoned her because she was too much trouble. And she knew that even when her parents' compassion had run out, that God's compassion still was strong. Jesus' compassion that he shows the leper is truly beyond our comprehension. We have nothing that we can compare it to in our society. But that's who our God is. Our God is compassion. So how do we respond to this incredible truth? That God shows us that he is a God of compassion. We're in a series on how do we love our neighbor. And so how do we love our neighbors well with compassion? How do we grow in compassion? I think the truth is that the way that we grow in compassion is the same way that we grow in anything in our relationship with Jesus. It takes consistency over a long period of time. It means consistently following Jesus, being obedient to Jesus over a long period of time. There's no shortcuts. There's no tips and tricks. There's no book. There's no hidden knowledge. There's no sermon that anyone can give that is going to speed you up on this journey of becoming more like Jesus. It is a lifelong process. It's not flashy. It's not quick. And truly, it's through the simple everyday things. It's through reading your Bibles, praying, loving other people, being in community with one another, serving others, that Jesus grows us to be more like him. But I do think that understanding what compassion is can help us aim for that target. And so my attempt at a definition of what compassion is based on what we see Jesus and God demonstrate in the Bible is this. Compassion is seeing the needs of others, feeling the needs of others, and then acting to help the needs of others. Compassion is seeing the needs, feeling the needs, and then acting on the needs of others. Put pretty simply, it is seeing, feeling, and acting. Compassion really is made up of those three pieces, and if you remove any one of those pieces, it falls apart. We need to be able to see people. We need to be in relationship with people who are needy. We see God always has an object. It's always personal for him. We need to know people and be in relationship with people who are needy. We need to feel something for them. Jesus is always feeling something for the people that he's having compassion on. It's this deep thing bubbling up from inside and overflowing, and we need to act to help them. We need to actually do something to help people. We can't remove any of these pieces. For example, if we don't see and we only feel and act, man, that means that our feelings and our actions of trying to do good in the world, it's not personal, it's dehumanizing. We don't have a target. What that looks like is somebody who may be championing a political agenda or a societal agenda, and they're holding up the sign, but then you ask them if they know anybody who's going through that, and they say no. It may not be bad, but it certainly is not compassion. If we try to remove feeling and we only see and act, we only see the need and meet the need, that's cold and clinical. That's the social worker who has eyes glazed over as they hand out food stamps. That's the doctor who diagnoses you with cancer and gives you a plan to treat the cancer, but then leaves the room once you start crying. It's not compassionate. We have to do more than just seeing and meeting needs. In fact, God is as concerned with the change that compassion is creating inside of us as the change that compassion is creating in the world. I'm going to say that again. God is as concerned with the change that compassion is making inside of us as the change that compassion is making inside of the world. God's objective, He's always more concerned about who we are becoming than what we are doing. God is always more concerned about who we are becoming than what we are doing, and feeling people's distress is a key part of that internal transformation that He does inside of us to make us more like Jesus. Gentlemen, I think we are at a particular risk of this one. Because it looks good, it looks like we're still helping, we're showing up and we're helping, we're making a difference in the world. And in fact, men, society tells us that we need to see problems and we need to treat problems, but we need to stay emotionally distant. We all like the cowboy who rides into the town, kills the bandits, and then rides off into the sunset. No feelings, no emotions, and no attachment. That's kind of cool. But that's not going to help us to become more like Jesus. We need to be brave enough to allow ourselves to enter into the suffering of other people. Jesus always does that. What if we just see and feel, but we don't actually help people? I think this is the most obvious one that's not compassion. If we just see someone in need and feel bad for them, but don't do anything to actually help them, that's not very nice. That's like watching somebody drowning and feeling really bad, but not throwing them the life raft. Like, we got to do something to help people. These are the people that Jesus is always correcting in the Old Testament, these religious hypocrites, people who see needy people and say, I will pray for them, but don't do anything to help them. Notice when the leper came crawling to Jesus, Jesus didn't say, I'll pray for you, bud. He didn't hand him a devotional. He didn't invite him to church. He didn't pray for him. He healed him. He met the need. We have got to meet the practical needs of other people. Here's the reality, friends. I did not understand what compassion was. I didn't. I thought it was soft and gooey, or I thought it meant letting people off, even though they kind of deserve punishment. But I was confronted the more that I learned about God, because if the first word that God uses to describe Himself is compassionate, and I thought compassion was for some people some of the time, I need to re-examine what I think about compassion. Because if all perfect, all holy, all just God describes Himself as compassionate, then I need to think about how I need to be more compassionate. If you're in this room and you're a believer, being compassionate is not optional. Jesus says you must be like His Son. You must become compassionate. Now, I do think that we can struggle with different areas. Maybe you struggle with the seeing part. Maybe as you think about your friend circles and your social circles, you're like, man, I don't really know any people who are needy. Most of my friends are Christians. Maybe most of my friends are upper middle class. I don't really know anybody who's going through a hard time. Maybe you need to re-examine the way that you spend your time, who you have over for dinner, and what your social experience is like. Let me tell you, we live in New York. You don't have to go very far to find people who are in deep, deep need. Maybe for you, you need to work on that feeling part. You're okay with showing up and serving. You're okay with helping people, but you're going to remain closed off. Maybe you need to consider opening up and entering into the suffering of others a little bit more. That it's actually okay and actually good for you to be vulnerable and to experience the suffering of other people. And maybe for you, you struggle with acting. Maybe you don't really actually do something. When you look at your calendar, when you look at your bank account, how much of that is actually going to people who do not directly benefit you? Because here's the truth, friends, that's a little hard for us sometimes. It is not enough to go to your job and be a good worker and to come home and to love your family. It is not enough. Jesus calls us to something higher and greater. We have got to meet the needs of other people in real practical ways. We have to. He does, so must we. How do we love our neighbors? Can we love our neighbors if we do not see them? No. Can we love our neighbors if we do not feel for them? No. Can we love our neighbors if we do not act to help them? No. I think we can all agree that this world would be a little bit better with more compassion in it. Your relationships would be better. Your family would be better. Your home would be better. Your neighborhood would be better with a little bit more compassion. And I think that we can all agree that we could use a little bit more compassion from people too. The problem is that we don't really understand what compassion is. But the good news is that we don't have to look very far because our God himself is compassion made into a man. So let's be people that see, feel, and act with compassion to the people who need it most.